Dario Argento is the most significant director in the Italian horror genre. Today I will discuss in detail Argento's first film as director, 1970's The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. I am the Italian Horror Guy, and this is the first ever episode of the Italian Horror Guy podcast. So, before we get to discussion of The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, I just want to give a little bit of detail about what the podcast is going to entail. Over the next couple of days, will be recording 5 separate podcasts, one for each of Argento's first 5 giallo/horror films that he made. There's a Western in there that he directed that I don't think I've ever been able to access and isn't overly relevant to the topic anyway. I've decided to lead in this way because I think it's probably a good, effective way of really hitting the ground running with this podcast to look at someone who really is, as I said in the introduction, the most, I believe, important director in the genre. I think individually he's had some of the most memorable and eye-catching films, and I just think, especially in this early period, the 70s, right through the 70s, that he just made so many great films. And I think his early work really influenced the shape of the giallo film. And you know, there's just so much to look into with these films. So I'm at heart a person who analyzes films. I think from time to time I'll be giving sort of little discussions about the context of budgets or issues with films being made, but essentially I'm a very nitpicky guy. I'll be talking a lot about individual scenes in films and subtext, and even at times maybe even daring to branch out into discussions and how films can be read in relation to the context of what was happening in society at the time. So I hope that's very interesting. Also, I think this, just to go back to the idea of doing these 5 episodes at once, I think that a really interesting way to tackle a particular genre or subgenre of film is generally they've earned a degree of fame with individual entries, like with Argento, for example. I think clearly Suspiria is his most famous film, and then Deep Red, and then there's probably a massive gap. But I think most of the types of people who will be interested in listening to this show won't just be interested in that type of, extremely popular entry into the genre. I think that most Italian horror film fans really enjoy the lesser known films, and I know for someone like me, I'm a big fan of seeking out all the work of my favourite directors and even some more obscure ones. So, as I mentioned, I think Deep Red and Suspiria, his most famous. I think The Bird with the Crystal Plumage was very influential, but I think nowadays it's not something that a general horror fan, a film that a general horror fan would necessarily have heard of. And certainly his next 2 films are not particularly famous, or not even necessarily rated that highly, but having sort of sped watched them again, probably for the 40th time in the last little period, it's clear to me that regardless of whether his plots are great, or the acting, or even some of the settings, that there's a reason why someone like me or someone else can get so ensconced in, I don't know if fandom's the right word, but in this this love for this genre, because even looking at some of the weaker entries, it's such a fascinating genre, and I think partly because it's so far away from the kind of films that would be released today, or even probably that were released at the time, like things that they were inspired by. Often I think things like film noir, and just generally that sort of detective type of thing, mixed in with the kind of horrific imagery that Argento, I think, was really refining in his earlier films. They're just so unique, right? Sometimes they're ponderous, sometimes they're fast-paced, but for mine, always they're interesting, right? Always they're a really sort of it's a unique and different type of cinematic experience when you watch a giallo film, and certainly an early Argento giallo film. So I'll kick in now to The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. So I'll just premise this discussion by saying, one, I'm not the kind of guy who's going to give star ratings, nor am I the kind of person that's necessarily judging the quality of these films, albeit doing an entire podcast on a particular genre does suggest that in general I like them. But nonetheless, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage is one of my favourite all-time films. It's not far behind Deep Red for mine in Argento's oeuvre, if that's the right word. They're my two favourite of his, because I think Argento, everyone I think naturally credits him with, like, to put it simply, Argento is famous for his style and for his for the color and the vision and even his construction of very violent set pieces. But he is absolutely not famous for his stories or his character development. But I have always found myself with Deep Red, but I'll obviously just camp the discussion now in The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. I found myself absolutely fascinated with his characters. And I think what comes through, especially having watched, as I said, sort of sped-watched all these films together, is that Argento really, really cared about his characters in his early films. So, again, to do that thing that I said I wouldn't be doing much of, speaking about things outside the films themselves, I think it's been noted that in later years, and it could just be a budgetary thing or an evolution of film thing or an age thing, but obviously I think we would all agree that Argento's the modern Argento. There's a new film of his coming out relatively soon, I believe, but he hasn't made one since 2012. But he's sort of more giallo type films in the latter stages of his career. I'm thinking of Sleepless, which I think was 2001. They're not the same, and one is, I think, because they're suited to a particular era of cinema and even era of architecture, perhaps. But I think it's that the criticism's been labelled at him that at some point he basically admitted he really stopped caring about his characters, and he made it all about his style and the vision. And what is most fascinating, it's almost contradictory about Argento, is that because I think the style came so naturally to him, I think his character development and stories weren't his strength, but I think he believed in his stories and his character development. So I think a lot of energy was put into making that really work, and I think in his early films it did. And because the style and the substance and just the general look of his films is something that he is just so naturally good at, I think really he is able to get that across as a result of him actually caring about his characters and, by extension, his films in general. I wonder if at some point he began to read his own press and think, yeah, I am damn good with my style and my colour, so that's my thing that I'm going to focus on. And as a result, I think he let the actual, what would you say, well, just the importance to him of his characters sort of slip. And the result is that even in his most, or the result initially or originally was that even when some of his characters weren't necessarily that developed, I think the way that they relate to each other and interact was actually quite charming and quite enjoyable. Whereas in later films, if you find yourself not really liking the characters, I think you find yourself looking forward to them dying. And as much as you're going to an Argento film to see some great set pieces and to see some great gore and some great violence and some great suspense, the problem is I think once you get into that point of your career, or even doing that with horror films, I think the significance of them has waned. I think it's why sequels of horror films, and when series become that horrible word, franchises, sequels are at a natural disadvantage by the very fact that even if, or especially if, I guess, the killer became very iconic. I'm thinking of Michael Myers in Halloween, or Leatherface, those types, that they still became iconic in the context of you barracking or supporting for the people that they're trying to kill, not for them. But in subsequent movies, you go to see the violence. So anyway, I'll get more into some specific analysis of The Bird with the Crystal Plumage now. So we have Sam Delmas, who is, in my opinion, a very, very likable character. And one of the reasons I think he's likable is because the impression I get is Argento's characters, or especially his male characters, to some extent feel like they're almost extensions of himself. So there's a little bit of dialogue at the start of the film about that sort of explains that Sam is basically a struggling writer. And he's in Rome, but he basically needs to go home because he can't make any money. So right from the start, we like him. The very first images and audio of the film are absolutely sensational, in my opinion. There's that wonderful Morricone score, and they were always wonderful. There's that la 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 la, and it's so the sound of the Giallo film, right? That contrast of this lovely but almost eerie, almost menacing sort of sound that becomes menacing by what it's being contrasted with what we're seeing. There's this lovely lady that we don't know anything about. We're seeing her, but we are hearing her getting photographed, and it's also cutting then to the shot of the hands, the iconic Argento hands, which I believe were usually played by Argento himself, planning the murder of this woman. And it's that mixture of beauty and fear and curiosity and just murderousness, I suppose, that really characterized his film so well. So it's such a just sensational way, and just, I guess, beautifully sort of poetic in the way it kicks off Argento's directorial debut, because it's just so incredibly Argento. So we have Sam Delmas. He is I don't know, he's a pretty cool looking guy to me, always dresses very well, and he's just sort of wandering back home, or to his apartment, through Rome, some unbelievable settings, and we see what is, I think, one of the most Argento scenes that ever was put together. So from a distance, he sees some kind of scuffle happening in this rather bizarre contemporary art museum. I suppose you'd call it a museum, although there's not that much in there, an art display of some kind. And immediately he looks over, and there's the look of confusion. And this is something that I think was a very a common Argento thing early in his films, and to be honest, it's probably continued, that sense that we see something that is a bit confusing, so does the main character, and by extension, we are sort of the main character. In general, we see events through their eyes, and I think one of the things you need to be interested in order to be interested in early Argento films is mystery. You have to be desperate to find out what is going on. So in this scene, I personally think it's so brilliantly shot because it's, for a start, and Argento has explained this himself, one of his really effective and basic but clever tactics was to dress the other person in black, and Monica Ranieri, I believe her name is, in white, to give the sense that she is good and he is bad. Now, I will confess, the first time I ever watched this film, initially, I actually thought, I think the knife is in the lady's hand. And because I think there's a very, very brief moment where, and it's from the more distant shot, where I think it's the stance, it feels like she's the one with the knife. So I suspect for modern audiences who would come across this film, certainly by the end it's probably no great mystery when she is the one that's revealed as the killer. But nonetheless, it's not necessarily about being too smart, for example, for the filmmaker. I think in many ways part of the fun of making these films is challenging people to see if they can work out what's going on. But nonetheless, this film really begins this process of troubled and difficult relationships between men and women, right from the start of his career. And I do wonder if this is something that he brings from his personal life. So there's the ambiguity, and you'll notice throughout the film, quite deliberately, I think, whenever the topic is raised or discussed by any of the characters in the film, the killer is always referred to as a man or him or he, and to the point where, if you're noticing it actually feels like a deliberately misleading tactic and maybe should raise the eyebrows. But what I really appreciate about this scene is and it's so in the vein of this retroactively dubbed Animal trilogy from the early 70s of Argento, where everything's a little ponderous and a little bit there's a lot of mystique and mystery, and but there's not a lot of intensity. Right? Like, I mean, what's happening is very, very intense, but the audio's all off, which is, and by off, I don't mean imbalanced. I mean, like that when Sam enters that sort of room that I think he gets locked in, or at least can't get through to the main area, he can't hear from there, and then there's that guy behind him that can't hear him, and the whole thing is just very, very confusing. And it's just, I think it leads us into this sense that that early Argento isn't his films aren't necessarily rewarding us, say, with massive, unbelievable set pieces. And I'll say right off the bat, it's interesting that Argento is now famous for some famous sort of images and scenes of death, when I can't think straight off the top of my head in these first three films if there's any really unbelievable actual murder/death scenes. The films really are about the suspense, more so than the payoff, which seems to change a lot with the soundtrack as well with Deep Red and Suspiria. So anyway, this film this scene leads us into, or introduces us to, this character and the idea of confusion, but also the need to uncover, right? The sort of amateur detective. And I think Sam is certainly one of my favourite of his amateur detectives. So he goes to the police station and discusses over and over again what happened, and basically he sort of feels like something was slightly off, but he can't put his finger on it. And, you know, one of the things I love is this is such a simplistic, not creative story device. Just this idea of a character being like, oh, I'm sure I saw something, but I'm not sure what it is. It's sort of what David Hemmings does in Deep Red, basically the whole time. It happens in Suspiria. And it's not brilliant, but it demands attention, I think. It's like, yeah, what is it? And the story sort of, as a result, drags you along with it, right? And it's just so incredibly, you know, just incredibly interesting, incredibly intriguing. So Sam, again, to sort of emphasize this sense of ponderousness, and even the evolution of this sense of sort of indifference to death. So there's this maybe they were lucky, maybe it was just I assume it was just a very foggy night, or maybe morning, where Sam is walking back to his apartment after he's at the police station. It's very, very foggy, and we get some of, you know, those different shots, those potential POV shots of him, you know, as in potential, it might be the killer, it might not, or just a different angle. And eventually he almost gets his head cleaved off, and then the person runs away, and it's all a bit scary. And then there's that old woman and asks him if he's okay, he's fine. And then he just goes back to his apartment and very casually explains the situation to his you know, unbelievably beautiful girlfriend, Julia, played by Susie Kendall. And their sort of vibe throughout the film is very odd and up and down. I don't know if I like it exactly, because there are moments where Julia just seems so pathetic. Like, it feels like this sort of damsel thing where it's almost it's to the point where it just feels like it's a little bit sexist. But I'm not going to be complaining about that. So he explains very briefly what happened. He explains it, like everything that's happened, that he, you know, witnessed an almost murder, and that he nearly got murdered himself. And he sort of talks about it in this detached, humorous way, and then says that it's serious, or that it actually happened. And yeah, it's not overly clear that Julia actually believes him, right? So yeah, it's such an interesting setting, I find, actually, that apartment. It's like, I don't know, it's just this really weird open space, and if memory serves, I think we only see Julia in there for the whole film, really, and until I think the plane at the end when it's taking off. And I don't know, in some ways it's sort of, I think it's this sense of like, this is the safe place in the film, right? Pretty much for all of the film, actually, when we're having scenes in Sam and Julia's apartment, there's not a sense that something bad is about to happen. You know, I think Julia is a real grounding sort of, when she's around, we feel safe. But we never really have scenes with her by herself. So obviously later in the film, when she's by herself, the place becomes unsafe, and she nearly gets murdered. But I guess in some ways, I don't think this character of Julia is really is developed in the best way possible. I think Argento was going for something a little bit safe, and also obviously it's in the back of our minds that for the whole film that she will become relevant at some point in relation to the killer, because the killer is killing a string of young beautiful women. So I think we know at some point she's going to become relevant in that sense. But I think an interesting thing about this film, there's a lot of suspense, there's a lot of ponderousness. I don't know if you guys will agree with me, but I feel like there's a long portions of this film that don't feel as though something horrible is about to happen at any given time, or that it doesn't feel like the killer's around right at the moment, right? Like we're pretty clear when things are happening, and usually there's a certain construction or a construction to scenes that, especially when it's like these young girls or these young ladies that we've met, and we know this is probably the scene they're going to die. So we know stuff's happening then, but it's like something is going to happen. And I'm just thinking back, and I'll obviously go into more detail about this on episode 2, but in the Cat o' Nine Tails, most of the movie, it feels like, is about suspense and that growing dread. Not that someone's going to jump out any moment and kill someone, but that everything that's happening is building towards a moment like that. So it's so interesting that, in a lot of ways, and he made these 3 films rather quickly, in quick time. They were all released in 1970 and 71, but that they can be, in films that are structured in rather similar ways to each other, there can be such a shift in, I guess, in tone. So yeah, I just thought that was something that was worth mentioning. So I think one of the things that is enjoyable about this film is the way Sam's relationship with the policeman, the main policeman, who, just give me a moment, I've just got to check what his name is so I can refer to that, Inspector Morosini. The way their relationship sort of evolves, because and it's completely from the perspective of us being curious, right? Because as much as we like Sam, in his initial little interview with Morosini, asking him about everything, he asks for his passport. Like, oh, can I see a passport? Like, yeah, all right. And then he just puts it in the drawer and says, we'll keep that. Like, I'm pretty sure there's no way that that's allowed to be happening. But at the same time, it's like he's almost encouraging us, like, oh, I know I'm being a bit of a, well, I'm exercising power here that I don't actually have, but you as the audience you really want to see what's going on, and you really want Sam to want to as well. And it's interesting because even in that scene where he's annoyed, it's almost like he was fake annoyed, because he says he wants to call the American consulate or whatever, and he does call someone, and then it's to cancel, I think, a reservation or maybe a flight or something America related. And it's like immediately after Morosini's really done something pretty ordinary, he thinks, nah, I actually want to sort of see how this plays out. I'm going to put my neck on the line, almost literally referring back to the meat cleaver, in order to find out. Like, I really, really want to find out. And it's almost this sense of, like, he's this writer who is writing about, like, rare birds or something that he's not really interested in, but he's doing it because he has to make some money. And it's like, well, at least something interesting is going to happen. And I guess that sort of reflects in that rather cheesy sort of line voiceover at the end where, nothing ever interesting ever happens in Rome. But it's like, well, a big part of this is, or the motivation of the main character, Sam, is that, well, at least this is interesting, right? At least it's giving me a reason to actually bother sort of wandering around Rome to see what's going on. So, yeah, so as they're relationship develops, it becomes a really and it's probably worth mentioning. I just think in general Morosini's likable. He's just got a sort of likable face. He almost looks like a bumbling sidekick of a cop, but he's not the sidekick. But I just really enjoy that interplay where he's talking about. He's talking to Sam and saying, "Oh, I'm convinced you saw the killer's face that night," and that's also a really cool thing because it's one of the more sort of on the nose clues, because it's like, well, we should know for a fact that of the two people involved in the scuffle, he definitely saw one of their faces, right? And it was Monica. And obviously she is the killer, so it is a bit of a wink, saying, well, if you're actually thinking about this from a more literal point of view, then you'll think, oh, well, obviously it's her. And I think there's something. And I actually suspect this is like an outgrowth from the film noir genre as well. There's a gritty realness to giallo films that means that they can, I think, sneak in sort of absurdity without you really thinking about it. And the gritty realness is they're these often not. Like they're shot often in places that you feel like weren't hard to get permission to shoot, like just sort of random streets and little shops and things that are like, it feels sort of suburban. It feels real life. So you can have Morosini give Sam Monica's address, exactly the apartment number, and because he knows I want it, and like that's so unrealistic that a policeman would do that. But it's like, we don't really care, do we? It is an absolute absurdity that happens. So it's such an interesting thing where he gets Sam gets to the apartment and the husband's there and Monica's not, and how quickly Sam has become this detective, because he asks the husband how tall he is, and he says 6'1", and he does that sort of passive aggressive fake laugh, like, oh, it's funny, that's exactly how tall the police said that the killer was. And it's like, Sam, who are you exactly, right? And one of the rather humorous aspects of this film is, I find it unbelievably obvious that the person wearing black is the husband. Because you can tell by the height, even the way it's shot when he rushes back after the first scene when the police are there, he's pacing and stuff, and he's also wearing dark clothing. He's the same height, and also most actors in general are not very tall, so he's tall. Like, the film is directing you to the idea that he's the killer, to the extent that it's like, well, if he is the killer, then we haven't uncovered anything, so he probably isn't. But anyway, I guess I find that that whole scene rather humorous. So again, back to that sense of safety in Julia. So at the apartment, they're sitting down and they're like cutting little pieces of paper out from newspapers and getting all the information about the recent killings. And it's interesting because, again, within that context is this sense that well, Julia, you really do fit the bill here. But again, maybe it's something in the framing, maybe it's something in the just a general atmosphere that is put together in the scenes in their apartment. It's like we still feel that sense of safety. Like, we know that the killer's not about to come bursting through the door. And yeah, it's. I guess what I'd say is this film is about the interest in the killer more so than it is the fear of the killer. Whereas I certainly don't think that's always the case in Argento's giallo films. But as I say, like, there's a lot of scenes, like soon after that he goes to that shop where one of the victims has had previously worked, and he's talking to that very flamboyant shop owner, and it's got some more sort of high pitched and atmospheric sort of going on in the background. It's this very arty store, and Sam's sort of looking around, and he's like, oh wait, so, and it's so fake, like, so isn't this where that girl worked? And then the flamboyant owner sort of pretends like he doesn't know, like, what other girl, the one that was brutally murdered. It's like, the one that was murdered. It's like, oh, poor girl. And it's like it's so extraordinarily obvious that this guy is doesn't seem to care that much. But yeah, I wonder if that's sort of playing into. Like, I don't think there's any realistic possibility that people look at this scene and think that guy might be the killer. But I think, and this is a theme of some of the best giallo films. I'm thinking the film Torso by, I think, Sergio Martino. That sense that everyone's a bit of a threat, right? And whilst everyone's a threat, it's not. I don't think it's so much that it serves the purpose of, he might be the killer. He might be the killer. Albeit, while you're watching it, you can feel that. It's more about the constant sense of unease, right? The constant sense that if anyone, even people who can't realistically be the killer, can be either intimidating or just slightly off, then you never are allowed to feel comfortable. And especially in this film, as I've said, that I think in many ways it is one of the more comfortable of his films to watch, because there's so much, such a portion of it that is, as I say, in this moment right now, someone's not about to get killed, or the killer's not like lurking behind a shadow or a wall or something. Nonetheless, it does continue to creep into your psychology, while you're watching it, that it's building towards something bad, and that the explanation, whether you pick who the killer is or not, the explanation's going to be something a little bit off, right? Everyone's just a little bit off in these films. Nothing is quite as it seems, or as it would, as you would expect, I guess, in another film. So, moving on to one of the next killings. It's that woman, and she's been photographed, I think, at the races or something, and we follow her back to her apartment. And so, again, I think I alluded to it earlier about the actual killings that Argento has in his early, I'm thinking these three Animal Trilogy films specifically. They're not, the killings themselves aren't remarkable. Although this one is quite uncomfortable, because we see her, and it's a lengthy scene. We see her go into her apartment and get relatively undressed, and there's that scene where she's having a smoke, and the music's telling us what's happening, right? Like it's really building up, and we see her open door in her room or whatever, and the camera goes back to her having a drag of her cigarette, and then she looks back up, and then the killer's just standing in the door. This isn't a what would you say? It isn't a. We're not trying to make you jump. We're trying to make you uncomfortable, I think, and obviously she rips her underwear off and points the knife at her crotch, and it's very, very uncomfortable. Like it's sort of, and I imagine if you're a woman, it's really even more uncomfortable. But it sort of just makes your skin crawl a little bit. But the actual killing itself, we just sort of see some blood splat on the wall, and it's not sort of clear what part of her body that was stabbed. But that is an indication, sort of the revelation in terms of the I guess the interesting psychology that is described to us at the end as to why or what the motivations of the killer were, but also the knife is phallic, and it's this sort of almost a reverse rape situation, right, where this as is explained later, that she'd had a very bad experience of sexual violence and rape perpetrated on her, and that when she'd seen a photo that or painting that was similar to it, she for some reason identified with as the perpetrator rather than the victim, which to be honest I find very interesting as a thing to explore in a film. It's obviously a very tough and uncomfortable topic, but so just to dwell briefly on that scene, there's not really a great payoff in terms of the actual kill, and I think this happens a couple times where we sort of in his early films where we have this big build up, and then the actual climax of the scene isn't a massive payoff. And what I find interesting about that is, personally, I don't care. I love the suspense. But what's interesting is I think Argento sufficiently made his name for himself in these initial films. But one of the famous things that he goes on to do is become one of the great depictors of violence and set pieces. Like some of the violence in like Deep Red is absolutely just brilliant and effective and so uncomfortable. And then in Suspiria, it's just extraordinary, right? Like it's all about the spectacle and the payoff. So it's interesting that a director who, for mine, I love so much, and most of his films that I love can be linked to each other in some way, that he evolved from someone who built up a lot of suspense and really, really worked within the rubric of suspense, and then he evolved to still suspense, probably slightly less suspense, but extraordinary violent payoff. So one of the, as I alluded to earlier, with the interesting and often uncomfortable little relationships between the main man and the main woman, or the women in these films, is there's often a slight gap in terms of their philosophy or their attitude towards situations. So Morricini is not very nice to Sam right off the bat, but he seems to like him just because of the opportunity to get involved in this. Julia is, as we see earlier with the paper clippings and stuff, she's very, in some way she's interested in doing this, but she's still ultimately thinking about Sam's safety, and to some extent Sam and Morricini, in relation to Sam, are not really worried about his safety exactly. It's more like this sort of call to adventure type thing, where it's like, I'm willing to risk some degree of my safety in order to sort of live a little and do this. So despite the fact that Julia has really she's sort of allowed this to go on a little bit, but when Morricini comes over, she's automatically just hostile to him, just immediately. She yells at him for taking Sam's passport, and he's giving Sam some information. I think he sort of acknowledges that he's done the wrong thing, but Julia's, why don't you just leave him alone? And it's just interesting because it's sort of it often feels a little bit like Sam's just trying to undermine her, right? Like later in the film, where she's all happy and they've got those weird, cheesy sort of scenes where they're not exactly having sex. They're sort of playfully alluding to the idea they might have sex, but then they're kissing on the bed at one point, and suddenly he realizes he can go talk to the painter, and he just suddenly gets up and decides he's going, even though their flight's in 8 hours, and Julia's very, very annoyed, but it's sort of like he has enough respect to include her in some of the investigations and sort of pretend that he's taking her advice, but then ultimately he doesn't really respect it. Like there's that sense that he actually respects Morosini more than he respects his beautiful girlfriend, in order for him to investigate these murders of beautiful women, and in the knowledge that this person, if they get their hands on him, they'll kill him as well. So it's just really interesting because this, it's really, really difficult not to like Julia for obvious reasons, but at the same time, you're almost, I don't know, maybe this sounds bad, you almost accept his Sam's disrespect of her, because but at the same time, can you just let him risk his life so we can enjoy this movie? Julia, is that so much to ask? And obviously on a literal level, of course that's too much to ask, but it is what it is. So as we're going along, Sam comes along. Again, it's probably sort of cheap, easy writing from time to time that like Morosini just gives, go talk to this guy. So he talks to the pimp, who gets known as So Long, and there's that really sort of silly scene where he first meets him. He gives him that little bit of information, So Long, and then Sam just gets up. It's like even if he genuinely thought that he was saying so long, it's like he's given you like one sentence, But anyway, I'm not worried so much about the actual information that Sam gets. I just love that moment. And this So Long guy is so dodgy looking. Like he looks like, I don't know, all the worst things that a man could do. He's got the face of a guy who would do that. And there's that moment where he's like, I can't remember hang on, I might have written it down here in my little document. He looks at me, he's like, do I look like a guy who exploits women? It's like, well, and Sam sort of smiles, like, well, oh, yes, you do, actually. That's exactly what you look like. And I think this guy's really, really, really well cast for this role. So anyway, later on, Sam and Julia, they're walking, I don't know if they've been to dinner or a movie or something, and they're just sort of walking around Rome at night, which under the circumstances, it's almost as if they've forgotten they're in this movie, but anyway, there's a guy, so he's explaining to her that he's like, So Long's philosophy is that he expects everything from women and nothing from men, and they have a great giggle about this, but it's like, in some ways that is the, I don't know, that's very much within the Argento film philosophy, right, early days. So that then leads us to this, that scene with that strange looking man who's following him around. Like he tries to kill them, and they run off, and Julia, Sam hides Julia, Yeah, it's sort of interesting how these things happen in movies where he tells Julia to hide. Now, he's obviously confident that this is a good enough hiding place, but for some reason he runs away. So why is he running away? Why don't you just hide with her? But anyway, so he runs off, and then there's this lengthy scene of him sort of chasing him around this bus lot. And it's interesting. Every time I watch the movie, I always think it's a bit silly if this guy's like a trained assassin, that he doesn't at least, or a hired assassin, that he doesn't at least hit him once. But then I think in one of the subsequent conversations that Sam has with, the killer has with him on the phone, that, the killer indicates that it was a warning. He wasn't actually trying to kill him. But again, this scene itself, which I really enjoy the setting. I love the way it happens. I also sort of love the way Sam only seems so fearful of losing his life, right? That's sort of weird. He's not, he's a writer, like it's not like he's a war vet or something who's been in situations like this before. But he seems to have no issue just hiding and then running away and then nearly getting shot a number of times and just sort of, not worrying about it. And then he ends up, I sort of love the way the scene turns around and he ends up actually following him. The guy trying to shoot him into some hotel building, and then there's this convention with all these people who are wearing the same jacket, and that whole thing is so bizarre. It's like there's such an odd tone, and it's got that music. I'm not even going to try to imitate it, but it's so. I guess the tone of the film is just shifts a lot, and maybe it's because I just love Argento films and I love being involved in them that it can. Maybe I'm overly defending it because other films that have sort of imbalanced, shifting tones can be a failure. But I think at worst it's enjoyable, but at best I think it's the aim. Right, I think you're meant to go on a little bit of a roller coaster of emotions because there's something inherently roller coaster like about the revelation. Right, it's like we know that it feels like it's a sexual violence sort of related thing. It feels right through the film like there's a hostility to women. Well, it doesn't just feel like there is a hostility to women, and I think. This film makes it abundantly clear it's about women and about attractive women because obviously some of the dialogue confirms it, but the very act of nefariously, secretively taking photos of beautiful women, there's something very stalkerish about that, right? Which I think that's really really effective. So, there's another lady. I think her name might be Tina. Again, not the best payoff. I think she might get strangled or something at the end. But I just wanted to note, and maybe this is just a Rome or an Italy thing, but some of the settings that they shoot these things in. Like one of Argento's favourite things is to shoot from the top or bottom of these bizarre staircases, like her apartment building. I think she goes in and the elevator is not working or something, so she has to go up the stairs, and you look up and it's like this triangular sort of winding staircase, and it's such a sinister looking place. Like seriously, even if you hadn't seen a film like this before, I feel like if you were looking for a new apartment in 1970 in Rome, you'd look at that and no, there's no fucking way I'm living here, and so again, I don't know if Argento was necessarily satisfied with his killings from these early films. I suspect by the way they became more and more extreme as his career went on, I suspect maybe he got better at it. But So I guess what I'm saying is, so the payoff for the actual kill in this scene isn't necessarily great, but you know what Argento is and what he became is already extraordinarily apparent in this scene. Like, you know, you can have this winding, you know, terrifying looking staircase. It's very psychologically impactful, but to be able to shoot it in a particular way to elicit, you know, a reaction from the audience is really, really effective. And, you know, there's always that creeping music in the background, especially in these scenes, but just in general throughout this film, that, you know, is really, 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 really effective. So I guess just to note on the killing of this Tina woman, if I'm right, that he sort of slashes her a lot after, right? Like a lot of it has been subtle up to this point, but it's this particular one really wants to demonstrate, if killing them simply didn't demonstrate it strongly enough, this anger and hatred of women, right? I don't want to just take their life, but I really want to desecrate their body, right? So in a sense, I think that's probably effective for the audience in terms of, you know, as I say, we like Julia, and it's not long after that finally Julia feels like she's under, you know, she's under some threat from the killer. So they get a call from one of the two back in the apartment. It's like, you know, your pretty wife or your pretty girlfriend, she's very beautiful, and you know, we see Julia while that's happening, and it's like, okay, so now the film's taken us on this journey of aggression towards women and this hostility towards them, but it hasn't really given us the motive, the direct fear for, you know, the woman in the film that we like because we know her, Julia. And now the stakes seem to get raised. And then again with the tone thing, there's that guy, their friend, or sort of their friend, he's talking about the noise on the tape and saying he thinks he recognises, like as in the bird with the crystal plumage, and it's disappointing because he can't think what it is. Oh well, and then they just sort of start making out with him staring at them. It's so weird. But anyway, I just thought I needed to mention that because it's it's just odd. So I think while they're making out, this scene that I alluded to earlier, where he's thinking very, you know, it's clear that he's thinking suddenly, and it's like, and he gets distracted from Julia or Susie Kendall, and you know, he would want to be thinking of something pretty important to be not taking advantage of this situation, and he realized, I'm going to go talk to Berta Conchalvi. So what is actually very hilarious about this scene, and I think because of the absurdity of it, is it's actually, I think, almost redundant, because I can't remember if Sam actually gets any information out of this guy, but the second that he realises he's sort of just eaten cooked cat, he just wants to leave immediately. So anyway, just before the film gets to that moment, is him rather extremely patronisingly just saying, no, I'm going to go. And she doesn't want him to go. Like, I'm going to go. And him sort of giggling as she's like throwing things at him. He's like, it's fine. Just lock the door and don't answer for anyone, and there's police outside. And it's like, Sam, you're in a goddamn Giallo movie. There's no way that those cops aren't going to be killed, mate. Like, just think about it. She's not safe. Once you leave, she's not safe. And again, the safety of this place as a safe space, if you like, within the context of this film, is it's Sam is more us than anyone else. He is the main protagonist. It's safe for him because Julia's there, but it's also safe for Julia because he's there. Once he's gone, we know, and all the women who've died really in this movie have been beautiful and alone. So we know that's sinister. But anyway, she's throwing stuff at him as he's going. And anyway, so he goes to see Berta Consalvi, who is the painter of the painting, the very sinister painting of a man attacking this woman in some snow. That is this sort of central device within the film, and there's just something so hilarious about it. Again, as I say, I feel like the sort of amateur detective main characters of the film are like Argento's personality being sort of put into the screen. But I also feel like these sort of wacky characters that appear occasionally in these films are also partly Argento. This sense of like, as an artist, I'm a little bit insane, right? Like, and what's so funny about it is like, at least from my perspective, when you see, even maybe movies, but more so like paintings and art and stuff, which I don't know much about, but there is something mystical about it, that it's like you can't imagine the person who did it is like a normal guy, or even a person at all. We see this painting by Berta Consalvi, and it's like this by Berta Consalvi. It's like, oh, who is this mystical Berta Consalvi? But his character is almost like this idea that I'm an artist who are a little bit insane, right? But it's so funny, like it's deliberately taking the Mickey out of that idea. So it's like, I only paint mystical things now. It's like, and Sam asks why, and the response is, why? Because I feel mystical. And I find that so funny, because it's like this idea, and it's almost like probably taking the mickey out of people like me for even bothering to talk about films. It's like, I don't know, why are you analysing this, right? And it's like, I wonder what it's like that idea. I wonder what the painter was feeling when they wrote this. It's like when they painted this. It's like maybe nothing. It's like, this is really mystical. I wonder what they were feeling. It's like, mystical, right? Anyway. It's very, very funny. And then to really emphasize how crazy he is, it's like he catches these cats, and because I eat them. Just that revelation, because we see it. He gives him this plate of this really weird looking stuff, and it's not obvious what the hell it is, and he eats a bit and he seems to enjoy it, and then obviously he realizes that this crazy painter has just given him cat, and then he just immediately leaves, and then he's yelling. Alberto, who didn't want to let Sam in the first place, is now yelling at him how much he wants to sell him a painting for. So, because it's like, even within this mystical, crazy, weird guy, it's like, yeah, we're still got to eat, right? It's just like how Sam, he's not really enjoying the writing that he's doing, but he's still got to make money out of it, right? So, and it's quite interesting that is a thing that would happen in Argento's first film as a director, right? There's probably a little bit of self-reflexivity in that. So one of the themes I think of horror films in general is, especially of the era, 70s, probably going into the 80s, is just these basically indefensible, pathetic, screaming women, right? And probably rightly at times people have looked at it and said, this really isn't really a good way of depicting women. Now, I maybe want to defend this film slightly in relation to the scene where Julia, when finally the killer comes to get her, and for a lengthy period of time they're like sticking that little knife through the door very, very slowly. But Julia is so pathetic and defenseless in this scene. Like, she's just rolling on the floor, screaming and stuff. It's like, Julia, do something to defend yourself. But I just wonder, in a sense, not that she'd been particularly, I don't know, brave up to this point of the film in any specific way, although, again, she's helping Sam look through papers and stuff, so she's got the degree of courage that she's interested enough to not absolutely yell at him to make him leave the country. But nonetheless, in this scene, she's very pathetic. But I feel like potentially we're given this scene to really emphasise how, what would you say, under the thumb women are in this film, as a sort of final distraction from the idea that that it could be a woman who is the killer. Right? It's like men are the aggressors in this film. When she's pathetic, Sam comes back and rescues the poor damsel. And, you know, not long after this, we end up, you know, with the initial revelation. And again, I think on a psychological level, the film wants to let you know, like, no, women are completely defenseless and pathetic in this film, which is why I think the revelation is so brilliant, even if it's maybe a bit ridiculous. You know, it really does lead into the way his films work so effectively for this period. Then that friend guy comes in and says, oh, you know, he's worked out what the bird is. And it's this rare bird from Siberia. And this guy's like such an idiot because he's all, you know, oh, it's a bird from Siberia, and you know, they can't live outside, they can't live in captivity, and it's all like, oh yeah, and then he's like, oh, but there's only one here. It's like, mate, that's the one that we're trying to find, you stupid moron. So anyway, they go to the zoo, and I sort of love it. And I don't know, I think there were a few before Bird, but I sort of love these sort of lengthy and silly animal-related titles that they had, and sort of the explanation for why it's called that. And it's like there's a bird that has the most insignificant role in the film that is the name of the entire film, because it's like, you know, you think like, oh, the bird with the crystal plumage, the cat o' nine tails, the four flies on grey velvet. I guess two of those are like, the first and the third of those are like key to the revelation of the film, whereas the cat o' nine tails isn't. But it's like there's no real rhyme or reason to it. It's like, how can we get this clever, cheeky title with an animal in it? But nonetheless, I think it is just a really cool title. But anyway, so we see the bird, and it's cool. I think that noise is cool. You know, within the process of detective films or shows, I think having this, what was that noise? What was that thing? What exactly is it? That's how. I don't know. I think that's part of what attracts us to detective stuff. I'm like, what the hell is that damn noise? And yeah, so I think it's cool that it is a noise that sort of ends up, you know, doing the helping us with the revelation. If there is one aspect of this is a bit annoying, it's that, you know, Sam's been to the apartment before, so when he realised it was at the zoo, not that we know, but he would know that the apartment's right near the zoo. So it shouldn't be when they're already at the zoo and the positioning of the bird that he works it out. Because Rome's a pretty big place, and it's like he's already suspected it came from the apartment. So anyway, you know, it's probably that's probably just a slight gap in the writing that, you know, I guess I'm willing to forgive. So then they have the next scuffle where the husband ends up falling out of the window and dying, which I actually think is a really effective shot, with the exception of the fact that it cuts from the shot and then the landing straight to like the result, and the way it's cut sort of feels like there was a little scene in between that got deleted. But anyway, I love this is when the film shifts. It never feels in that moment as if he actually is the killer. And again, I remember watching it and thinking, no, this doesn't feel like the revelation. Men have been the aggressors in the film, but the way he dies in the dialogue, he's talking about Monica. He's like, I admit I did it. Take care of her. But there's a sense like, well, who's taking care of him? He's just died. While he's struggling there, I don't want to die. All that. It's like there's something revealing in this scene that, as in, obviously it reveals slightly longer term that he's not actually the killer, but also that the killer of this film isn't a man, because there's that sense that men are sinister in this film, but Sam isn't exactly. We thought this guy was, but in actual fact, he's just been doing everything to try to protect Monica. And so in this scene, not only does he lose his life, but he also loses the sense that he's threatening, right? And I think, his height, even his age in relation to Monica, the way he rushes in the initial scenes after the early scene, and it sort of feels like he's controlling of her. It's like no, we had that all wrong. Like this isn't a film about men oppressing women. So whilst logically by this point of the film it could only be him or Monica, the best thing about this revelation. The revelation being not that the film's faking that he did it, but the revelation that this guy isn't exactly what we think he is that the film's been misleading us about the positioning of men in relation to women, right? And they've been doing it with making Julia so defenseless, with making all the victims women. We'll now move towards we'll go straight to the last bit. I love the moment when Monica comes out. And actually first I'll just mention I actually just find that whole scene where he's standing on the steps and the camera sort of zooms up and then across to this sort of this intricate, it's almost like this maze, this web of like she could be anywhere in this part of the city. I love that he wanders off and sort of says, "Oh, did you see a woman like this run past?" Like, yeah. So just these helpful, well-placed citizens just helping him direct to where she's gone. But anyway, so when she comes out, and obviously, they briefly think it's that annoying friend guy, but he's dead. When Monica comes out and he remembers, I just love the way he remembers, right? Like that's where you were holding the knife. It's like, because there's a part of it that's like, if you think back to the opening scene and this whole, like they focus on some of that art and, throughout the film we see different shots, I guess his memory of it. Like, if you really think about it, if the scene is, the film's as good as told us that, like, and I mean even before the death of the husband, the film's as good as told us that the person wearing black is the husband. Like the way it's like it's obviously him. So we've got that information, and we've also got the information that something that he was looking at was off. The only real possibility is that that Monica was the antagonist, because the film is at pains, like definitely he's under some kind of misapprehension. Like it's not going to be revealed, oh, there was something off about that scene. It's not going to be revealed in the end that, oh, there actually wasn't anything off about that scene. It was just his husband trying to kill her. Her husband trying to kill her. Like that's obviously not going to be what it is. But there's almost this sense of like, oh, what an idiot. Of course that was the case, right? When he realizes it. And anyway, again, they have their little scuffle, and again, the killing and the fighting in the early parts of Argento's film, the early part of Argento's career, aren't amazing. But one thing that I will say about the scene, like, he ends up under that big piece of art, whatever you'd call it. It's almost like a wall, and the positioning of Julia on top and him on the bottom, and they're almost in this sort of sexual position, and she's toying him with the knife, that the phallic imagery. It's very much like that role of men as the dominant force in this film. It is in a subtextual sense, revealing what the psychiatrist explains to us right at the end of the film, that it's the role reversal, right? She was raped, and therefore a victim. But when she saw the painting that nearly depicted it, she reversed the role in her mind and became the antagonist, the rapist. And in this sense, for the whole film, Sam's been chasing this situation, and there's been different scenes with Monica where she's rather pathetic. I just want to thank you. He's the dominant one in relation to her, and now this scene reveals, no, he never actually was. Then it's just really mundane the way they I think, knock the knife out of her hand and then get a hold of her. But nonetheless, so the final scene, I see it as very much maybe an ode to / dig at the end of Psycho, as we know with the psychiatrist at the end. That is not really what the psychiatrist at the end of Psycho really is a stand-in for Alfred Hitchcock telling us how clever he is. Whereas maybe this is the case with this scene as well, but I quite like the explanation in the sense that there's something rather formal and procedural about the film in the way it is anyway. Maybe that's me just stretching to defend the sort of on-the-nose explanation. But nonetheless, I think it's acceptable, because it's like we've had to deal with all this stuff. We've had to deal with this investigation. It's been good fun, but like ultimately, as much as it led him to the killer, Sam, that is, it didn't lead him to her in a way that affirms that he's clever, right? He's not clever. He should have realised this from the start if he could have actually realised what he'd seen, right? But nonetheless, I just think, whilst we're getting this explanation, and then it's sort of being intercut between that and the plane sort of turning around and leaving, it's just sort of odd, because if you listen to the music, it's got the la la stuff again. It's like in that scene, like it's so calm, right? It's so like what happened was for the moment we can only make conjectures, and then he explains what don't really seem to be conjectures, but about that, she had a horrible experience when she was younger. Then she saw the picture or the painting, and then she identified with the perpetrator. It's a very interesting explanation, but it's just so factual, right? And I just think, I guess it's almost like it's police-like, right? It's very to the point, and it leaves us feeling this sense of calm, I think, right? We've worked out who the killer is. Sam's fine. Julia's fine. They're so happy when they're getting on the plane. Even the sound effects of the plane are really, I don't know, there's something soothing. Like, we know that he's getting out of Italy and he's going home and he's had this experience, but he's added a bit of excitement to his life, and it's just really interesting, like the way the film. I think one of the things that was happening in films at the time, if you look at the American horror film, and I think certainly the end of some of Argento's films not long after, in fact, probably straight after, that they would generally leave you with a sense of, okay, we've wrapped it up, the main character survived, whatever. But the world seems like a different place now. But a different place that we're scared of. Whilst we've had our expectations subverted, and it's this, the revelation is surprising. The sense it leaves you with is that even though that's happened, everything's okay. Sam's fine, he's going home, he got the plane after all, and here's the explanation in a nice little package for you. So in a way, it's odd that you go away from this movie feeling quite positive and upbeat. Now, you might do that if you're a horror fan anyway. You might do that because you love watching horror movies, but that the actual theme itself can make you do that. Nonetheless, it probably rounds out the overall tone of the film that is just that little bit odd and sort of up and down, I suppose, and leaves you maybe at the top of the feeling roller coaster that I'm feeling pretty good, and I reckon I can watch myself another Argento film very soon. And thankfully for audiences at the time, there was another one coming soon, and thankfully for you guys, there's another podcast coming soon. As I say, I'm recording these all very, very quickly, and releasing them all probably basically in one go. So that concludes my analysis of The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. I hope you've enjoyed it. Episode 2, which, I guess by the time that they're all out there, they'll all be up there sort of together. But yeah, I'll be doing The Cat o' Nine Tails in episode 2, and I hope you've enjoyed this one enough to join me for that one as well. Because I think it's actually very, very enjoyable to discuss these films, and I'd really love to build myself a following. And I think I'll say this at the end of every episode, but I've got a website or a blog site called The Italian Horror Guy that's going to go online any moment, next couple of days, and yeah, I'd really like to build a following. I'll have contact details on there as well if anyone has requests about Italian horror films that they want me to do, or just open up a dialogue about some aspect of Italian horror that you might be interested in discussing with me. And also, just before I round this out, I'll give a plug to one of my other podcasts, which is called the horror film / film science podcast, and that's me and my brother who discuss various things, discuss various films. We've done in the initial episodes, there was me talking about Halloween Kills, then we did a list of Halloween movies, then what did we do? We did Texas Chainsaw Massacre, then Psycho, and then The Room, the 2003 classic, and we're doing a film called The Holy Mountain next week. So I'd love it if I could bring my audience over to that show as well. But to wrap this up, this first ever episode of the Italian Horror Guy podcast, I've been your host Kale, and I really hope you can join me for episodes 2 through 5 and then beyond that. This has been a pleasure, and I look forward to you guys listening to me in the future. Thanks very much.